There are men who raise a toast to celebrate. I poured mine slow and deliberate that night and kept my mouth shut, because keeping my mouth shut was the only way I was going to get my daughter out of the worst mistake of her life. The dinner was at Harvest and Stone, a restaurant off the square in Cookeville that I'd booked 3 weeks in advance. White tablecloths, local honey on the bread plates, the kind of place that says this town is worth your time without anyone having to say it out loud. I wanted Rodrigo's parents to walk through that door and feel welcomed. I wanted them to see that their son wasn't marrying into nothing. I didn't get that. What I got was a lesson in how quietly some people can make you feel like furniture. His father, Ernesto, ordered a bourbon and asked the server if they carried anything from Oaxaca. The server said no. Ernesto said, "Of course not," with a smile that wasn't a smile. His mother, Catalina, set her cloth napkin in her lap and looked around the dining room the way you look at a hotel room you've already decided isn't worth the price. My daughter Haley was laughing at something Rodrigo said, her hand in his. That laugh, the one she's had since she was about 7 years old, the one that comes from somewhere deep enough that it sounds like she's always a little surprised by it. That laugh was the only reason I kept my face easy and my voice warm all the way through the appetizers. I've eaten worse things than condescension. I know how to do it without choking. Welcome to Dad's harsh revenge. Get comfortable. I'm going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I think you're going to want to stay for this one. Here's what nobody at that table knew about me. Not Rodrigo, not his parents, and honestly, not even Haley, not in any way that had ever come up between us. Between the ages of 32 and 43, I spent 11 years running electrical crews out of El Paso, Texas. Infrastructure work, commercial builds, industrial projects close to the border that paid well enough to justify being 1,500 miles from home 6 months at a stretch. Nearly every man who worked under me during those years spoke Spanish as his first language. Some spoke nothing else. I learned the way you learn anything you actually need, not from a textbook, not from a class, but from 11 years of getting it wrong in front of people who had no margin for me to get it wrong again. I came back to Tennessee fluent. I came back quiet about it, because nobody in Cookeville had any reason to care. I ran my electrical business, I raised Haley, I lost my wife Carol 6 years ago, and I moved forward one morning at a time the way you do when that's the only direction left. Spanish was just something that lived in me like old muscle memory, unused and waiting. It waited until that dinner at Harvest and Stone. About 40 minutes in, Ernesto leaned toward Catalina and said something low in Spanish, casual. The way you talk when you're certain nobody within earshot speaks the language. And Catalina, who had spent the previous half hour being politely cool with me across the breadbasket, answered him the same way. A switch flipping. I kept my face turned slightly toward Haley, I kept both hands around my water glass, and I listened to every single word. They talked about the restaurant first. Ernesto called the menu acceptable for a small American city. Catalina agreed and said the daycare was trying very hard. Small things, the kind of small things you can file away and leave there. Then Catalina said something I was not going to file away. She'd been looking past my shoulder toward the far wall, where the restaurant rotated pieces from local craftspeople, a Cookeville tradition I'd always liked. And there, under a soft track light, was a photograph, an 8x10 print mounted on a simple oak frame. It showed a rocking chair on a porch in autumn, the oak trees behind it gone gold and orange. My rocking chair, my front porch, I'd submitted the photograph to a local arts fundraiser the previous year and hadn't thought about it since. But that's not what made me go still. What made me go still was that the chair in that photograph was not just any piece of furniture. It was the one I'd spent 4 months restoring the winter after Carol passed. A 1940s pressed-back oak rocker I'd found at an estate sale, completely stripped, one arm cracked through, the cane seat rotted down to wire. I'd repaired the arm with a wood splice you couldn't find with a magnifying glass. I'd recaned the seat by hand over most of that winter, learning from a YouTube tutorial and a library book and about 40 hours of mistakes, because I'd never done it before, and I needed to do something with my hands that I could finish. I'd stained it in the dark walnut color that Carol had always loved on old wood, said it made furniture look like it had lived a full life. That chair sits on my front porch every morning. The first time Haley saw it finished, she cried. She said it looked exactly like something her mother would have chosen herself. Catalina tilted her head at the photograph and said, quiet and pleasantly amused, "Qué lástima. Alguien cree que eso es arte. Parece algo de un mercado de pulgas." Someone thinks that's art, looks like something from a flea market. Ernesto smiled into his wine. I set my water glass down. Not hard, not a sound, just down, with both hands flat on the table for one deliberate second. She's looking at the chair I built for my wife and calling it flea market junk. Nobody at the table noticed. Rodrigo was showing Haley something on his phone. Ernesto was reading the entree descriptions. Catalina took a slow, satisfied sip and looked pleased with herself the way people look when they've delivered a punchline in a room where they think nobody else speaks the language. I looked up and caught Ernesto's eye across the table. Gave him the same easy smile I'd been giving him all night. You have no idea what you just said in front of me, and I'm not going to tell you, not yet. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. Toward the end of the entrees, I excused myself toward the restroom. On the way back, passing through the narrow corridor near the server station, I came up behind our table from the back, and Rodrigo, Ernesto, and Catalina, who had their backs to that corridor, didn't hear me returning. They were leaned in together, voices low, speaking Spanish. I stopped, looked at my phone like a man reading a message. Ernesto, ¿ya están listos los documentos con el abogado en Miami? Are the documents ready with the attorney in Miami? Rodrigo, not lifting his eyes from the table. La semana que viene necesito que él firme antes de entender lo que está firmando. No va a hacer preguntas. Next week I need him to sign before he understands what he's signing. He won't ask questions. My hands stayed exactly where they were. Ernesto again quieter. El viejo solo quiere que la niña sea feliz. Eso lo hace predecible. Eso lo hace fácil. The old man only wants the girl to be happy. That makes him predictable. That makes him easy. And Rodrigo, the man who had sat across from me 7 months ago in this same town with what I thought were genuine tears in his eyes while he asked for my blessing, chuckled. Low and comfortable. Por eso funciona. Confía en mí porque quiere creer en mí. Ni siquiera va a leer la letra pequeña. That's why it works. He trusts me because he wants to believe in me. He won't even read the fine print. I walked back to the table at the same pace I always walk. I sat down, I picked up my fork. He is not marrying my daughter. He is performing marrying my daughter. I just watched him rehearse it in front of his director. I want you to understand what it takes to sit at a table after that, to cut your chicken and ask Catalina about the drive from Nashville, and listen to her answer with a pleasant expression on your face. I've had hard days on job sites. I've had days where I found out mid-project that a supplier had cheated me, and I had to finish the work and act like everything was fine. You learn to keep your hands steady when your chest wants to cave in. You do it for the people you love, and you do it because some fights only go your way if you don't start them in a restaurant. So I smiled, and I paid the check, and I drove home alone through 36 miles of dark Tennessee highway with the radio off. Haley texted me before I got in the door. Dad, they warmed up so much by the end of dinner. I could feel it. Thank you for making the effort. It means everything to me. I sat in the driveway and read that twice. She has no idea what's coming, and the way she finds out is going to matter more than almost anything I've ever done. I texted back, anything for you, sweetheart. Get some sleep. Then I went inside and called Dex Hartley, a man I'd known since we were both 24 years old on a job site outside Midland, who'd spent the last 22 years doing financial background work for a risk consulting firm out of Houston. Not the kind of man you call at 11 at night with good news. He answered on the second ring. Kowalski, it's been a while. I said, I need a favor and I need you to be thorough. He was thorough. 4 days later, he called me back. Warren, he said. The way he said it told me everything before any actual words. Ernesto Fuentes' import company, the one he mentions at dinner like it's still operating, filed for the Mexican equivalent of creditor protection 18 months ago and hasn't recovered. There are outstanding claims against his personal real estate in Guadalajara going back further than that. The house, the property, the whole picture. And Rodrigo Warren, he has an active civil judgment against him in Mexico, a failed private investment fund. 6 investors who lost money he was managing. He never disclosed that to your daughter, not once in 7 months. I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the porch, at the dark shape of Carol's rocking chair in the evening light. What are the papers? I asked. Dex exhaled slowly. That's what kept me up. They're working through an attorney in Miami who specializes in cross-border asset structures. On paper, it looks like a family partnership investment, the kind of thing you'd present as a wedding gift, as estate planning. What it actually does is position your commercial property on Route 70 as the primary collateral for an offshore holding entity that Ernesto controls. If that entity defaults on its creditor obligations, and Warren, based on the numbers I'm looking at, default isn't a possibility, it's a timeline. The offshore lenders have legal claim to your land, through U.S. courts. No real recourse once you've signed. I didn't say anything for a moment. They didn't fly here to welcome me into their family, I said finally. No, Dex said. They flew here because you own something they need. I called Craig Abernathy that same night, the attorney who'd handled every land deal and contract dispute I'd had for the past 17 years. I read him 3 sentences from the document Dex had managed to get a partial view of. Craig went quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had that flat, careful quality it gets when somebody's describing a crime dressed up in clean language. Warren, this is a cross-collateralization agreement structured to look like a family gift. Your commercial property becomes the security asset for a foreign holding entity. When that entity defaults, and it is designed to default, U.S. registered creditors can file an immediate lien against your land. You would lose it, without a trial. Explain that like I wire buildings for a living, I said. They want you to sign a document that turns your land into a guarantee for debts you didn't make and don't owe, Craig said. The moment the overseas business goes under, which it's about to, your acre and a half on Route 70 belongs to their creditors. That's the plan. I need you to build me something different, I said. Same general appearance. But when it gets opened in front of people, what's inside is the truth about what they were actually trying to do. Send me everything Dex sent you, Craig said. By Thursday, I'll have it ready. The next morning, I called Rodrigo and told him I'd been thinking. I said it seemed like a shame for his parents to make the drive back to Nashville every day when I had a perfectly good guest room sitting empty. Why not stay? Let's really have some time together. That's what family does. Haley called me back within the hour. She sounded like she was trying not to cry. She said she hadn't expected that from me, said it meant more than I knew. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window. You want a front row seat to what you think you're pulling off? Come on in. I built this house. I know every sound it makes. If you've been following along, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Hit the like button if you're with me, and make sure you're subscribed, because we are not done yet. Ernesto and Catalina arrived Thursday afternoon with 2 suitcases and a bottle of aged tequila they handed me like a tribute. I put it in the cabinet and thanked them like I meant it. For 5 days I played the part. I let Ernesto explain commercial real estate to me over breakfast like I hadn't owned a parcel on Route 70 outright for 19 years. I asked Catalina about Guadalajara, about Rodrigo as a boy, about whether Tennessee summers were what she expected. I let them settle in. On the 3rd morning, Ernesto wandered back to my workshop, the 2-car garage I'd converted years ago, full of lumber and hand tools and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil that I've loved since my 20s. He stood in the doorway in his pressed trousers and looked around the way a person looks at something they've already privately decided isn't worth much. This is where you do your projects, he said. When I have time, I said. He nodded once and walked back to the house, and in the hallway, far enough away to think I couldn't hear, he said to Catalina in a low voice in Spanish, El hombre es un trabajador, cree que es artesano, no tiene idea de lo que está a punto de firmar. The man is a laborer, he thinks he's a craftsman, he has no idea what he's about to sign. Catalina murmured something that came with a small laugh. I kept planing the edge of the board I was working on, kept my hands exactly where they were. The following Sunday evening, Ernesto found me on the back porch and sat down across from me with his tequila and the ease of a man who thinks the hard work is already behind him. Warren, he said, settling in, what you've built here, your business, this property, it's something to be proud of. In our family, we believe in protecting what families build together. Rodrigo and Haley deserve a strong foundation. We've had our attorneys draft a family partnership structure, something to secure her future. We'd like your signature before the wedding. He slid a folder across the table. He didn't hand me a pen. He was watching to see if I'd reach for one myself. I picked up the folder, turned it over in my hands, let my face go carefully blank at the first page, the way a man looks at a wiring schematic from a country he's never visited. Ernesto, I said, I'll be straight with you. This kind of document is above my head, but I want to do right by Haley. Let me have my attorney take a look so I understand what I'm agreeing to. I paused, like something had just occurred to me. Actually, I was thinking about the engagement party next Saturday. What if you and I signed it there? In front of both our families? Make it a real moment, something meaningful. The satisfaction that moved across his face was not subtle. He thought he'd set a hook and watched me swim directly into it. Warren, he said warmly, that is a beautiful idea, very meaningful indeed. You have no idea what kind of document is going to be on that table. Craig had everything ready by Thursday. He walked me through it on the phone for an hour, and when we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time, looking at the dark shape of Carol's chair through the window. They weren't trying to marry into my family. They were trying to buy it, and they were going to use my daughter's engagement party to do it. Saturday arrived. I strung lights through the oak trees in the backyard, the ones I'd planted the spring Haley was born, and set up long tables with white tablecloths and mason jars stuffed with wildflowers from the meadow behind the fence, the way Haley had sketched out on notebook paper and texted me twice to make sure I'd gotten right. About 50 people. Family, neighbors, Haley's friends from the physical therapy practice where she works. The crowd where everybody knows, at least half the room, and the noise of it fills the yard like something alive. Rodrigo and Haley stood near the drink table, his arm around her, both of them glowing with the particular ease of people who believe the hard decisions are already behind them. Ernesto and Catalina held court near the food with champagne flutes. My champagne, I'd bought 2 cases specifically for that evening. Craig stood off near the fence line in a sport coat, a club soda in one hand, and a leather folder under his arm. He caught my eye once, gave me the smallest nod. I looked at Haley across the yard. She looked over and mouthed, "Thank you, Dad." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. What comes next is going to hurt. But it's going to hurt a whole lot less than what they've had planned for the rest of your life." I picked up my glass and tapped it once with a knife. Conversations dropped off. 50 faces turned toward me, loose and expectant. The way people look at a father who's about to say something warm. "I don't love speeches," I said. "Most of you know that about me. I'd rather be in the workshop." A few laughs. "Good. Keep them easy. But my daughter is getting engaged to someone she loves, and his family came a long way to be part of this. I want to honor that." I raised my glass toward Ernesto and Catalina. "Thank you both for making this trip, for being here with us tonight." Ernesto dipped his head, gracious and practiced. "The pleasure is entirely ours, Warren." "I'm sure it is," I said. Something shifted in my tone by maybe 2 degrees. Enough. Catalina's smile flickered at the corners, like air moving under a door she thought was sealed. "Since our guests traveled all the way from Guadalajara," I said, keeping my voice easy, "I thought it was only right to honor them in their own language. Particularly since they've spent the past 2 weeks under the impression that I didn't have one." I looked directly at Ernesto. The color began to go out of his face. I switched to Spanish. 11 years of El Paso came back without effort, the way old muscle memory does when it finally gets called on. "Escuché todo," I said. I heard everything. "En el restaurant cuando dijeron que la silla en esa fotografía parecía algo de un mercado de pulgas." At the restaurant, when you said the chair in that photograph looked like something from a flea market. "Esa silla la hizo el invierno después de que murió mi esposa, con mis propias manos." That chair I built myself, the winter after my wife died, with my own hands. "Y en el pasillo de mi casa cuando dijeron que soy un simple trabajador que no tiene idea de lo que está a punto de firmar." And in the hallway of my house when you said I'm just a laborer who has no idea what he's about to sign. "Y en el restaurante cuando mi futuro yerno le prometió a su padre en español que yo firmaría todo sin leer la letra pequeña, porque soy predecible, porque lo único que quiero es que mi hija sea feliz." And at the restaurant table when my future son-in-law promised his father, in Spanish, that I would sign everything without reading the fine print, because I'm predictable, because all I want is for my daughter to be happy. I switched back to English. The backyard was completely silent. 50 people, the string lights in the oak trees, crickets starting up somewhere in the tree line. Rodrigo was on his feet, flushed deep red. "Warren, you're misrepresenting?" "I'm not finished," I said. "The voice I've used on job sites for 40 years when a man is about to make a mistake I'm not going to let him make." He sat back down. Craig walked forward and handed me the folder. 3 weeks ago," I said, opening it on the table so everyone could see, Ernesto presented me with a document he called a family partnership agreement. A gift, a way to secure Haley's future. I turned to the first page, Craig's summary. Plain American English, no legal fog. What it actually does is place my commercial property on Route 70 as the primary collateral for an offshore holding entity controlled by Ernesto. When that entity defaults on its foreign obligations, and according to a financial background review I had done, that default is not a question of if the creditors have legal claim to my land, through U.S. courts, with no meaningful recourse on my end. I turned to the next page. Ernesto's import business in Guadalajara has been in creditor protection for 18 months. It is not recovering. Another page. Rodrigo has an active civil judgment against him in Mexico for a failed private investment fund. 6 investors. He never mentioned this to Haley, not in 7 months of being engaged to her. Haley's voice came from across the table, quiet and exact. "Rodrigo." He turned toward her. "Haley, just listen if you'll let me explain." "You told me your family wanted to do something meaningful for our future," she said. Her voice was completely level. You were talking about my father's land. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out that was worth anything. She reached up and took off the ring, set it down on the table in front of him. Then she stood up and walked around the outside of the table. Not away from the yard, not away from any of it, and she stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, facing outward. That is my daughter. I turned back to Rodrigo. I handed him the second document from the folder. That's an itemized accounting of the expenses your family incurred while staying in my guest room, and a formal notice that I'll need the room back by tomorrow morning. Ernesto found something like a voice. Warren, surely we can discuss. We can absolutely discuss, I said, in English or in Spanish. I follow both just fine, as it turns out. His mouth closed. I picked up my champagne glass, my champagne, bought for exactly this night, and took one slow sip. Set it back down on the table with a small, deliberate click. The guest room lock sticks, I said. Lift the handle before you turn the key. Nobody moved for a long moment. 50 people, the string lights in the oak trees, a single light buzzing somewhere near the fence post like it had somewhere else to be. Catalina's voice came from somewhere, rising and searching, but I had already turned away. Haley and I walked toward the house together, past the wildflower centerpieces, past the mason jars, past the people who would be talking about this night for a long time in ways that had nothing to do with Ernesto Fuentes or a document drafted in Miami. On the porch steps, Haley slipped her hand into mine, the same way she used to when she was small enough that her whole hand fit inside my palm, and she'd walk like that without even thinking about it, like it was just the natural way to move through the world. Dad, she said quietly, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. I'm so sorry. Don't be, I said. You trusted someone. That's not the wrong thing to do. The wrong thing was his. We stood at the top of the porch steps and looked out at the yard, at the lights still going in the oak trees, at the tables, at the people who actually belonged to our life, at Carol's rocking chair in the far corner of the porch, still and solid in the evening dark. You built that the winter after Mom died, Haley said. Yeah, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She would have loved tonight. The end of it, I said. She definitely would have loved the end of it. Behind us, I heard Ernesto and Catalina moving toward the house. They'd be in the guest room before long, packing in the particular silence of people who have run completely out of moves. The lock sticks. Lift the handle before you turn the key. They came 1,200 miles thinking they were walking away with my land. They flew home with nothing but the memory of an old electrician who learned Spanish on a job site in El Paso 30 years ago and kept it to himself until the one night in his life when it was worth everything. They called me predictable. They called me easy. They thought knowing what I wanted was the same thing as knowing what I'd do. They were wrong about a lot of things, but that one cost them everything. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you on the next one.